Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just Saturday afternoon. It's just about 5 o'clock. I've probably got another hour before I go home. I've got a couple of things I want to finish. And this is a lovely old 1985 R80 GS. That's a G-stroke S, of course. It's been in here now for a little while. We've done an engine rebuild on it, and timing chains and seals and all the usual things, carburetors. And its engine is fine. It's ready to be road tested when I get the front suspension back on it. But its owner asked me to have a look at the front end in it because he said it's felt a bit funny. It had some work done on it at some point time in the past. I don't know where or by whom, but he certainly is not a mechanical man. And so I started taking the front end apart because there was a range of things that happened. I had a devil of a job getting the legs off. Both the seals were leaking, and the one on the side nearest to me particularly, it wouldn't come apart. It spun the big cap bolt in the bottom that holds the fork leg onto the damper rod, and I had a heck of a job with it. I put a 1/2-inch rattle gun on it in the end in desperation, and the next stage was to take the leg down and get the head milled off the cap bolt and then figure out what had happened. And when we excuse me, I've got a bit of a tickle in my throat, so just bear with me because I will do this video even so. I will have it back together in a day, and I guess you guys will miss the lesson in this. Eventually, when with the rattle gun, we did loosen it about a quarter of a turn, and we were able to get a screwdriver under the washer underneath the cap nut, and with a lot of patience and hours, Andrew, who works with me, finally managed to get that cap bolt out, and we got the leg apart. Now what we found in there, not on the other side but on this side, in the bottom of the spring, was one of these spiral spaces that goes on the bottom of a wound spring that hasn't been flat finished. Trouble is, both the springs in the bottom of these legs are flat finished. That was causing the spring to bind in the fork leg, and it was very stiff. You couldn't push the damper rod up no matter what you did. You had to, because it went up in chatters. And I took it all apart, took it all to pieces, cleaned it, replaced a couple little bits in there, and put it back together again. It all went back together nicely. It all screwed up nicely. Everything was just quite wonderful until I got up here to the top plate and I aligned the forks. And this nut here, for those of you who don't know, it's got a flange on the bottom of it that's a locator. It goes down into the hole in the top plate and it sets where the plate will be. Now if you have a close look here, you will see that the fork tube does not line up with the plate. Aha, I hear you say. You haven't got it lined up on the other side. Well, the other side's exactly the bloody same. So we start to look and we try to figure out what's happened, and we're not really sure, and this gap seems to be a bit wide for me, and I'm just not convinced that it hasn't had the bottom triple clamp replaced at some point in its life. I don't know the history of the bike, and neither does the owner to that extent, but very obviously the reason it's been feeling funny is that, one, it had this thing putting a tension on a fork spring and not on the other side. And if I back that off and jiggle it around and muck about, I probably could get those nuts back in to hold those stanchions. They certainly came out of there, that's for sure. And that's probably why we had such a devil of a job undoing them. But it's very, very obvious that the triple clamp is not the right one for this bike, or for this combination of things. Now when I put it together, I lined everything up and I was able to push the axle straight through the bottom of the fork legs where it's supposed to go. No trouble at all, it just slid in and slid out. So that tells me that this was square to this here, these were square across that way, and the forks were parallel to each other, otherwise the axle wouldn't have gone through the hole. And that's what made me look more closely at this top triple clamp. I know the handlebar's in the way, but you can see clearly there that those two forks don't go within a bull's roar of lining up with the holes. Similarly, when I take this off, Oh, and of course drop it immediately on the ground. I wanted to show you something in there. There's the flange that locates it in that hole there, which actually centralises it where it's supposed to go. Now when I took that off just before, that nut there was on upside down. Excuse me, pardon me. It has a rebate on it. It's designed to press down on the inner cone of the steering, or the inner race actually, of the steering head top bearing, and that's how you set the preload on the bearings. Now I'm going to pause this video for a second. Now what I've done here is overlay that top triple clamp on top of an RS top triple clamp that I replaced with a forged one some years ago. I've got a few of them, and if you look, you'll see that that hole there is lined up, that hole there is lined up, and that hole there is not lined up. So this appears to be I'm going to turn the camera on its side here, I hope this works. This appears to be a genuine top triple clamp for an R80, although if that's the case, then the bottom triple clamp must be a different one because the holes don't line up. If I put, which I did, put that RS plate on, all three holes line up properly and the whole assembly will go together square and clear. So I took another RS plate that I had and cut and linished it down to the shape of the other one, the one that appears to be a genuine one, and you can see that those three holes line up. Now what's the point of what I'm trying to say? Well, if you're going to put something back together on a BMW, and if you do it properly, everything will line up. The chances of a manufactured part not fitting because you have to grind half of it away is absurd. They always fit. If they don't fit properly, sure, you can have a manufacturing default, or fault I should say, but that would be one in I don't know how many hundreds of thousands. I haven't certainly found them, and if ever I find a situation where something doesn't fit properly, it's always because something is not done properly. Never anything else. Not in my case anyway. And I realise that I am a bit of a village idiot, but I kind of take some comfort in that when I'm working on BMWs because they always go together properly. Now if you saw the difference in that original plate, lined up the holes there, lined up the holes there, and look there, there's no chance in the bloody world that that front end could have gone together without being under some massive tension. But it was together. If you look at the fact that it had one spacer on one side which was off a spiral wound fork spring and none on the other, and when you push the tension down on that left hand spring, it was buckling and rubbing on the inside of the fork leg. You can clearly see the marks. The message of the video and the thing I'm trying to say is if something doesn't fit on a bike you bought, don't hammer it, bend it into place or twist it around. Take it apart and figure out what's wrong with it, or take it to somebody who can help you figure out what's wrong with it, because that bike, there is no way in the world it would have ridden anything like an absolute monster with that setup in it. Incredible, isn't it? Like you go over here and you look at it simply. Everything now bolted up clearly, easily. This slid in easily. These slide up and down easily. They just don't fit on the top triple clamp. But we will fix that. When it's finished, it will be right. If you're working on your bike at home and things don't fit properly for you, don't keep going, flogging it, grinding, cutting things off. Stop and figure out what doesn't fit. You'll be a much wealthier, happier and wiser person for the exercise. Please stay safe, ride safely, keep well until we meet again.